Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 70, another milestone episode. It's crazy. We've been here for 70 episodes, many of them right here on the Black Belt Magazine Facebook page. So we start with a big thank you to Black Belt Magazine for hosting the podcast. Got the logo right there behind me. Thank you for supporting, and thank you to everybody tuning in today, because without your support, today's episode would not be possible. And I'm getting goosebumps as I say it, because I am so honored. I normally say I'm excited. Today, I'm honored by this episode because we have the father of modern bow, the head of the lineage that began my bow staff training, Shihan Michael Bernardo, on the show today. We're going to be going through all types of career highlights, and I've got so many questions that, sir, forgive me in advance, that I'm going to nerd out about, and I just cannot wait to dive into this. For those of you that don't know, some of you might not be sport karate fans. If you know sport karate, you better know Mike Bernardo. But for those of you that might be new to the sport karate scene, an absolute legend of the sport, could win grand championships, forms, weapons, fighting, has some ridiculous win streaks on his resume in the weapons division, as well as other divisions too. But weapons is always what most remember him for, and the innovation that he did with the bow staff. And that's all that I'm going to say so far. So, sir, I'll allow you to introduce yourself a little bit more, tell us about you, and then for our Black Belt Magazine audience who comes from all different walks of martial arts, just kind of tell that origin story. How did this whole martial arts thing start for you?
Well, I think like a lot of people out there, it started with my parents. I was just before I was 8. It's a typical story. There was bullies down the street, and my dad had seen some of the first martial arts movies. So we're talking 1971. And he put me in, actually started with judo. The school that I went to had judo classes. And as that class was getting out, there was a karate class. And I liked judo, but when I saw that they could kick and throw these punches, I was just like, that's what I wanted to do. So I think for about 6 months, I did both, and then talked my parents into just doing karate. And, I was like 7. I'm 57 now, so I've had 50 years of it. And I really can't remember when martial arts wasn't really part of my life. So, yeah, it was pretty exciting. My first instructor was Harold Warden, and he told me a story not too long ago. He reminded me that I was there for about a year training, and he used to have on Saturdays a special class that I guess the top students, maybe his tournament team. And so I stuck around. I told my mom that I was going to be staying later on Saturday because I was going to train with the tournament team. So I'm 8 years old or whatever. So I show up, and he said, "No, you have to go home." And I'm like, I was kind of stunned. And so I had to go home, had to work a little bit harder. And like I told him, I said, that really, meant a lot to me, because I realized that I wasn't going to be given anything. Nothing was going to be free. Had to work for it. And I think it was like a month or two later, I got to stick around with the elite students and train. So that's kind of how it all started for me.
That's so cool. And I love hearing some origin stories, because it seems like the theme is a lot of people get into martial arts for the same reason, right? There's movies, and then you try it, and then you see something that inspires you, or something happens, and that makes you want to stick to it. One thing with sport martial arts in particular, that not every school, of course, supports competition. A lot of schools don't even tell their kids that tournaments exist, right? So for you, how did that start? How did you get introduced to the tournament competition scene?
My first tournament, I was 9 years old, and the school went to a tournament in Toronto. So I told my parents, I said, they rented a school bus. And I said, I get to go on my own. So they wanted to come, but I'm like, no, we have to travel as a team. So I went, and didn't know what was going on. But again, it was so long ago. We were doing sparring, and I had won and made it to the final 4, I think it was. And I lost my gi in the daytime. So all I remember at night, I was wearing this really long, rolled up uniform, but I ended up, and I must have lost my 2 fights because I took 4th place in sparring, but the little trophy was was awesome. So I came home. My parents were really proud. They weren't too happy that I lost my uniform though. And that's after that, I think they were at all my events. They traveled with me because obviously I wasn't responsible at that age to remember things, but they were a big part of traveling. All my early memories of tournaments were the drive with, my parents going there. And I think when I first started, there was probably like 4 or 5 events a year that I would sort of go to. I never really traveled until I was a black belt. I got my black belt at 16. I did kickboxing for a couple of years because around my area in Canada and Ontario, a classmate of mine who is a few years older, his name was Leo Laux, and he ended up becoming the PKA world welterweight kickboxing champion. So we trained together, and he was sort of one of my role models. So all I wanted to do from 17, 18 was kickbox. That was it. Then they ended up banning kickboxing in Canada because of the hits to the head. They said it was too dangerous. They held it so essentially my career was over. I think I fought once in the States and that was it. And then I started to look at, go back to regular tournaments. And I was forms and fighting. And to be honest, I started doing the bow because I was starting to pay for the tournaments myself. And back then it was one price for 1, 2, or 3 events. And it was really that simple. I was like, well, if I'm paying, $40 to do 2 events, I might as well do 3. And that's how the bow career kind of started.
That's awesome. I particularly love you reminiscing about like those road trips with your parents to like go to tournaments in the region. Because I feel like so many sport karate competitors start that way. I remember, getting down in the States, growing up in Kentucky, traveling the RSKC, which used to sanction the bluegrass with NASCA, right?
Yeah.
Just so many competitors now started with those road trips with mom and dad. So I think that's really special.
For sure. Yeah.
And you talk about the onset of the bow career. You talk about not really traveling till you were a black belt. So I'm curious. I feel like every competitor who becomes what we call not just a good competitor, not someone who can win, but what we call a quote-unquote great competitor, there's always that moment, that big breakthrough win. There's something your coach tells you, that there's a moment when you realize I can be one of the best at this, right? So you started doing bow because it was convenient. At what point did you realize that you could be great, that you could be one of the best?
Yeah, it just kind of started. I mean, at first, I think, I liked all 3. I did start to have some success, like locally with the bow, and I kind of knew because I think I was a good fighter, but I wasn't a great fighter. Forms, pretty good, but I could sense the bow was kind of the was going to be my vehicle to reach things. I went to a U.S. Open early on when I first started competing, not knowing anything. And it was more just a trip. And this is when it was in Daytona. I think I was 22, 23. And it was just basically looked like a cool tournament to go to. And I ended up, it was huge. There was like 50 some odd competitors. And I ended up, there's a guy from Canada that I knew who was traveling to all these tournaments. And he told me, he said, Mike, he said, when you go to these tournaments, he said, they have seeds, the top 4. He said, basically, he said, you're not going to win. He said, you'll be lucky to make, in the top 10. That's what you should be shooting for. And I'm like, oh, okay, sounds fine. I didn't know. So I went and I went up early. I remember I was up 2nd or 3rd, and I ended up placing 2nd. And I was kind of bummed that I only took 2nd. I wasn't sure how it was supposed to work, but he came over and said, wow, that was, you did pretty well. And then I got a little lucky. I went to a tournament in Montreal, and I was in a grand championship, and the Trans World Oil team was there at the time. So John Fournette, all these guys, and it was actually John Fournette's tournament. So he wasn't competing, but all his friends were there. And I ended up taking a runner-up position at the tournament. And I had no idea. On the way out, he says, here's your ticket. And it was a ticket to Bermuda for the Trans World Oil. They had these black belt tournaments, and I won this trip to go there. So I didn't really know what was going on. I went there, and there was big prize money, and I ended up taking second to Keith Hirabayashi. And so just by doing that one event, I had all these people kind of see me. And I remember afterwards, Charlie Lee became a big friend. He did an interview for Black Belt Magazine, and he said, this Mike Bernardo is going to be really good. And I thank him for that now, for saying that. But so I was able to sort of make the jump really quick. Within a year, I kind of went from a nobody to, a lot of the good competitors knowing me, because I had that sort of initial success. So, I was lucky, that those events were around and, I placed. But, I always tell the people in my seminars, everyone's path is going to be different. Everyone has those setbacks or roadblocks that they have to go through. It all comes down to how hard you're willing to work and sacrifice. And, so yeah, it worked out well for me.
Right. Oh, it definitely worked out well for you. And you talk about getting lucky. I think the luckiest part was that one of those big break moments was you getting to go on a trip to Bermuda, right? That doesn't
it was.
Before we dive in, because everybody that watches this and knows who I am knows that I'm going to talk about Bo for potentially hours on end. I'll try to keep it brief, though.
Yeah.
Before we get there, there's something unique about that era of sport karate where there were less divisions, just forms and fighting, but you were training to compete in all three of those divisions. You mentioned it was just convenient that way. Now in sport karate, we've got a million different divisions, different weapons divisions and different forms and different and all that. And now we see a lot more competitors specialize. The fighters fight, the weapons guys weapons. Sometimes you get crossover in forms of weapons, but it really depends, right? So that's what it was like back then, training to be competitive in all three at the same time.
Yeah. Well, they had, way back in the day, you were only allowed to do one forms and division. So you had traditional, freestyle, and extreme. The grand championships, as an example, my first year or two, they were always combined. Like there was no separate weapons grant. And I think I had something to do with that. So I was having a lot of success, combined. So they separated them. And then most tournaments had something at the very end, maybe where you would go head to head with the weapon. Training wise, it was really different. Like when I first started, there's a gentleman in Canada named John Atkinson who was competing a bit. And locally, he was my toughest competition when I was first starting with the weapon. And I'm the type of student that I try to figure out, things. I never really had someone teach me the bow. It was just watching and trying to learn from different people. And I just sort of started with the basics, things like turning your wrist over when you throw a thrust, because that's like how you throw a punch. And it made sense to me. And I would just basically try to break down these moves that way. And it just, I enjoyed it. It just, I kind of developed that part of the system. And then it was just a matter of, I would see some people doing different spins and can I do that faster? And it sort of went, but I really believed it was the basics, because especially when I was doing bow, there was a lot of guys that hadn't seen maybe that type of like trying to go faster. And so they were old school judges. And sometimes they may not have realized why they liked my form better, but I think it's because they could relate to it. Looked like I was punching, like the way you rotate a punch, you rotate the strike and all the movements. So instead of flipping moves, it looked more straight punching. They may not realize why they liked it, but I think they just identified with it. And I know, like sometimes I remember Black Belt Magazine, when I got into the Hall of Fame, wrote a little something, and they mentioned like the key eyes and my hakama, which was a different color, and the long hair. And I thought, well, that was cool, but that was kind of the flashy stuff that was on top of it. I think the foundation at the bottom is, sort of why I had this success that way. And because I was training that way with the bow, I was still doing my traditional karate all the time too. So that went into forms, which helped. Probably the hardest thing for me to train was the sparring aspect, because at that point I had my own school I was starting. And to be honest, my really good guys were all still 15, 16 years old. I didn't really have guys to train with for sparring. And most of my training was always on my own, like during the daytime, like between classes, like, which I'm sure a lot of guys do now. And so that was the hardest thing to train. I kind of wish, like, even the sparring, because I have more students that have excelled at sparring. My wife's a world champion fighter. I mean, I wish I would have known more about sparring that I do now. Then I think I could have been a little bit better and went at it. But that's I liked it. To me, it just grounded me in all three, because I could go to a tournament and win with bow and win traditional and get punched in the gut in sparring. So it really kept me grounded, and because I respected all three aspects and all the types of competitors. And so I just enjoyed it that way. So it was fun.
And what I love about that is you just talk about, to summarize it, being a student of the game, right? Doing all three events was being a martial artist first, a competitor second, and embracing those parts of the traditional martial arts that gave you the ability to do well in forms and to be in the division. And then you talk about the bow innovation, which is something that I talk about this to my students a lot, how sport karate bow striking is a separate genre of striking than the traditional Japanese Kobudo style. And if you watch Japanese Kobudo forms, it's very obvious that there's a difference. And not enough kids understand today is that you are the one who is largely responsible for that. You innovate the way that we strike, which I think is so cool. So because you deserve it, and I know you're not going to want to do this, but I'm gonna do it a little bit. Brag stuff. What are some of the big career highlights for you? I know that for black belt before I've covered, at one point in your career, you won like 57 consecutive weapons divisions or something crazy. So just reminisce, and maybe it's not even a win. Maybe it's just a form that you just love that you ran, win or lose. Take us through some of those, maybe three of your best
one
accomplishments.
Well, to start off, because I'll let the audience in. You kind of told me you might ask me some certain questions. And it's funny, when people ask me about wins, I can tell you when I didn't win. Like, I was pretty in division with Bo. I was pretty proud that I went. It was like 50, almost 60 times in a row, never lost. But in grands, so I can tell you, the bow coming out of my hand at the Diamonds, losing to Richie Brandon. I can remember losing. I remember all like yesterday, those losses, and they just kind of stuck with me a lot. But I think I always say in my seminars, if you're going to be like yourself, really successful, you have to know how to lose. And it's not, hopefully we're always, good sports, but it's, I hate my students know they can't come up to me and say I lost because of the judges, because, they never come up to me and say, oh, I won because of the judges, I didn't, so it's always, what can you do better? So, probably those, and it seemed like at NASCA, there's a perfect year in grands. It always eluded me. It seemed like there was one event a year that I wouldn't win the grand. So it was enough that always, kept the fire going, because it would drive me crazy that, I did something that wasn't or it wasn't good enough, or something has to improve. Now, and that just gets into, before I get to my wins, people are kind of amazed, but for, it was over 6 years. It was a year I took off. I was filming a bit, but I pretty much did the same kata for everyone. I mean, there's one or two little things I did differently, but it was the same. And I looked at, after a year or two, I was like, I should change it up. And I went and I redid this new kata, and essentially they're all the same moves, just in a different order. And then I thought about it. I'm like, well, the judges only see me 10 times a year. The chance of having the same judge at all 10 tournaments is slim. So they're probably only seeing me 3 times a year. I changed the form up, put in a different order. No one's going to know the difference. So I just kept doing the same one. And between each tournament, there was always one section that I thought wasn't up to where I wanted it. And I would just focus on that one section. And, it's just time. It's doing the same thing over and over and not getting bored and realizing that it's getting better each time. And that was sort of my philosophy with the bow. And probably the biggest win, you mentioned the bluegrass, was I adored Ken Eubanks, was awesome. And the bluegrass tournament was one of my favorite, because from where I live, you could drive there in about 8 hours. So I was at that tournament a lot. A lot of my students would drive to it too. And I forget the years, one of the beginning years, I ended up with 7 10s in the final. So, and they would score kind of as they went along. They'd watch the first 3, I think, in grands. I know it's so long ago, but I ended up with 7 10s, which I was never perfect, but it was a perfect score. And at the time, there hadn't been that many. So I remember that one. That was pretty cool. I enjoyed that. And that was really, that was the best. And the Battle of Atlanta, the year I won 3 firsts. I won fighting, forms, and weapons. And that was pretty cool. I'd really trained hard for that one. Probably got a little lucky in sparring and stuff like that, but it worked out really well. And it was tough with the sparring because I started filming after that, but I managed somehow at the Diamonds and the US Open and the Battle of Atlanta, those were the 3 big ones, to come away with a first place at each one, to do like the Triple Crown thing, which was kind of neat. So, later on in my career, I got good at sort of focusing on, 6 or 7 events a year. So I could kind of map out my training and really sort of gear up and, do it that way. And when I stopped competing was the last year, I noticed it was harder to train. Like I was still enjoying the tournament, but like we used to just compete Saturday. It was one day. I would notice Friday, I would hang out with the guys, till maybe midnight. And I'm thinking, well, wait, that's too late. Before I used to be in bed at like 10:30, 11, making sure I was ready. So that little bit of the fire was kind of going. And I thought it was a good time to get out before all the young guys caught me and made me look bad. So
I don't think anybody could have ever made you look bad. But one thing that I like in particular about what you were saying is because it's a common criticism of modern sport karate champions that, people don't change their form enough. And I've always had the school of thought, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like if it's winning,
that's right.
Then
exactly.
Formula. So speaking of formula, and I opened the show with this, and to this day, I tell all of my students the story of my lineage, which I was trained by Lauren Carney. Lauren was trained by Casey Marks. Casey Marks was trained by yours truly,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so I talk about the history, and I describe you as the father of modern bow. You've mentioned your innovations with the striking. I also want to talk a little bit about your innovations with the manipulation of the weapon, the one-handed swings, the tucking the bow under the arm, coming around, the spinning figure eights.
Yeah.
Where did the idea for all of that come from? You've already said it was contemporary back then.
Yeah.
Like, it was not something people were doing. So where did that idea come from, and how did you know that it was going to work competitively?
It was strange. It was, I would see things like a one-handed figure eight and, maybe like turning and then I try to figure out how to spin my, realizing that if you're doing a move where it involves footwork, then how fast you turn your body is going to determine how fast the bow goes. So it's kind of breaking it down, but it was just a lot of playing around. I spent years just, holding the bow, trying things and, doing different. So yeah, just, things would just kind of come like, when I was first developing that form, like just, trying to different ways to set up a spin, different things. I mean, I think there's cases where sometimes my students would, do something and I'm like, what did you just do? And then you try to break it down and you're like, oh, you brought under your arm. That's pretty cool. And, you start doing stuff. And even when I was competing, I would notice, and you must get this a lot, is people that would try to, because it's a form of flattery, they would try to copy the form, but they would just maybe try to do the big moves like the figure eight. And I think near the end, I had guys that were pretty fast doing that, but then they'd miss, like they'd come out of this big figure eight and it'd be like a weak strike. They just weren't seeing the whole picture. They were just focused on maybe the flash part or something like that. So yeah, I always knew there was like that blend. And then the other thing I think I had was the intensity of doing it. And that's a little bit harder to get to because my friends can tell you I'm pretty quiet. And, I kind of, if I'm at a tournament, I could be there for hours and not talk to anyone, just go about my own way. But when I would go to do my form, there's some type of zone that I would get to. And to be perfectly honest, back then we never filmed because no one had iPhone cameras and that. And the first few times I saw myself do my form, I was kind of like, I was almost embarrassed. I'm like, am I making that sound, that noise? Like it just, I don't know. It didn't seem like it was me. And the best forms that I did, I remembered bowing, starting, and then finishing. And it just went. If I was thinking of things during my form, or if I saw something or a judge or somebody, then I knew it wasn't that good of a form. And it was just kind of getting in that zone. And I try to tell people who are competing today, like my students, if you're trying to sound like somebody or make the noise like somebody or whatever, it never works. It has to be from in here, from in your heart. You just have to go, and whatever sound you make, it'll be cool. It'll be accepted because it's real. And it's the people who, if you try to fake it, it doesn't really go. So that part of my performance just sort of happened. I don't even know what tournament or whatever, it just sort of flicked on, but it just, that drive to just do it was just there. And I just didn't care what I looked like or sounded like. And to be honest, without the cameras, I didn't know. So it just went. But you mentioned Casey Marks. Casey, I met her when she was so young, her and her brother Butch and their parents. And I did some seminars at the tournaments, and then she came up to London a couple times. And students like that, really all you're doing is, it's there. She had it. She had the drive. it was just a matter of, maybe giving her a few pointers, but she would have actually probably figured it out herself. Like, she would have been like me. She would have had it. I maybe just sped the process up a little bit by giving some pointers, but I believe those students like her, it's there. They have the drive. And because look, I can tell 100 students in class the same thing, but only a couple, take it, go home and just keep practicing it over and over and over, and then come back and they got it and they move on. The other 98, you got to keep telling them the same thing. And she was able to, take a few things and come back, and I'd be like, damn, that's good. And then we'd work on something else. And she was never, like sometimes like with privates or, someone they just want an hour, like you teach them something and then look at you like, well, you got something else? What are we doing next? But she wasn't. It was just, when you're doing this turn, you got to, get your feet close together, spin faster. And then I just let her go. She would just do that until I told her, let's do something else. She would just keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And, students like that, you don't even have to tell me, like, I talked to her mom and she would say, oh, she really practices hard. I'm like, you don't have to tell me that. I can tell, you just don't get better each time I see you without, dedicating so much time. So yeah, I've had, some students like that, and it's, it's rewarding, but they do it. I just kind of give them a little bit of guidance, and, yeah, she's awesome. So,
absolutely. And I've got a specific question I want to get to about
Casey,
but before that, so much to unpack there, because that is probably the best description I've ever heard of what I call blacking out when you run a form, right? Now, you just get in the zone and you literally don't remember anything. I know exactly what you mean. And it's so hard to describe that. You did a beautiful job of describing that. And then you also mentioned that the imitation, not only of the moves, but of the style. If you guys have been watching, if you go on YouTube and you search like weapons forms from the 90s after Bernardo here had risen to prominence, you'll find all kinds of bow forms with long hair and hakamas everywhere because of Shihan Bernardo, right?
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point where, and I get students that come to me to learn, and this happens all the time, and they'll come to me and they're like, Jackson, I got a bow kata, will you look at it? And I'll watch it, and it's, maybe 7 or 8 of my tricks and then some not so good striking all interspersed throughout. And I'm like, number one, you need the solid striking to be competitive. And then number two, if you just try to look like me, much like other competitors tried to just look like you back in the day, you got to do something that sets you apart. And that leads me back around to Casey, because Casey found a way to look different from you. Where others were imitating you, you could see your influence on Casey, but she had her own thing. So the specific one I want to get to, because I've always wanted this, is Casey being one of, if not the first, to throw the bow, have it spinning in the air, and then catch it, the signature pose that I talked about.
I know. Yeah.
So where did that come from? Were you involved in the creation of that? What did you think of it? Where did that come from?
No, that was her. And no, I thought it was great. Look, all the competitors were great. And there was one year I was running, after I was done competing, I did a NASCAR tournament up here, but I was judging a lot. And, we'd have these meetings about, manipulating the bow, and, weapons should just be, manipulation of the weapon is so important. And as a female competitor, there's a few times, and these guys were awesome with the commas, but men competitors, and I couldn't see how it was even close. They were great forms, but it just didn't look like, a weapons thing. And she added that in, and that just sort of took it to a different level. Because, at that point, the grands were men and women together. So she was, having to overcome that too. I mean, men are naturally, bigger and stronger. So she had to overcome that part. And, like, to me, she's, of the people that I saw at that time, every time I saw her compete, I thought she won. And what I really loved about her was the consistency too. Like, just, it was there every time, and yeah, I was pretty proud. But no, that was her. And I understand why she did it, because unlike me, she had, even more, I think, of a challenge to get to that. And, when I say she was the best, I don't caveat it with she was the best woman, or no, she was just the best. That's it, like that I had seen. So no, she was good.
And I couldn't agree more. Whenever people
Yeah.
ask who my favorite bow competitors are, I was able to, well, unfortunately, I never got to see you compete in person because I was born in time. But I did to see Casey, and the technical precision, it was just unmatched by anything I've ever seen with my own eyes. And then, we talk about the release. I love how you recognize that the release was a response to adversity, because in many ways, as releases have become more and more prevalent in sport karate, not just with bow, but with all weapons. Like when I started doing, I think that the first combo I ever did that kind of started the release combo thing was, I think it was like a 5 or 6 release combo. And I did it because a whole bunch of trickers that were flipping over and over and over again 5, 6 times in a row, that's who was beating me. And I said, I'm going to beat these trickers. I need to do something with my weapon. So it's kind of a similar origin to Casey against the men and needing something different. So when you look at sport karate today, because as we're going to talk about, you're president of WKC Canada, you're around tournaments, you see modern sport karate, and you see the frequency of releases. And to make it easier, let's just limit it to bow. What is your take on that? What is your take on the state of creative, extreme, whatever words you want to put there, bow in the modern era?
I think it was a natural evolution that, I guess, if I thought about it, you would, as soon as Casey did the one, you had to think, it was just going to keep evolving. And you're right. I mean, I was glad to hear that story as a response to that's where innovation comes from. When there's a need, to adapt, you innovate. And no, I like it. I think as long as, you keep the, different categories for competitors. But the other thing, which is really cool, is, I've got kids that, can do 3 different weapons divisions now, so there's sort of, and the kids, I kind of encourage it, because as they get to adult, they're going to probably specialize if they keep at it. But when you're first starting out, you don't know, what your thing's going to be, so we do that. But no, I like it. I think as long as you keep the different categories, it's nice. It keeps it, fair that way, as far as, what you do. And I always thought, and I tell people, when you line up in line before you start the division, my mindset was always, I want to make sure that I had worked in my head harder than anyone else in the line. And I used to compete a lot with Kevin Thompson. He was a great, and again, an overall competitor. He did weapons, forms. He's a great fighter. But when I would stand next to him, I knew, you could just tell some people train. Some people look soft. He didn't look soft. He was hard, strong. He'd shake your hand. He'd practically crush my hand when he shook it. But I just knew if I wasn't training, he was. And just mentally, it was just that game. And even when I did my form, probably going into that zone, man, I was, even though you're just doing it by yourself, like I felt like I was in a fight with everyone else. And a lot of times, I would use Kevin or Chris Casamat, these other guys who are really good. But yeah, you have to, sort of have that, kind of mentality. But doing the different types of divisions like that, I think it's great. I think people can, sort of find it. And yeah, I'm good with it. I like that they keep dividing up the forms. And, when I noticed when karate, I'm not sure what's going to happen with the Olympics still, but when they had that avenue for traditional, you saw more traditional guys coming out to NASCAR. And the one thing about our competitors, they can adapt. I think we've seen, some of them move to the traditional karate venue and have a lot of success because they take that mindset of, how to perform, how to train and move like that. So yeah, I think our sport's, lucky that way that we can attract. We're so inclusive of so many different, genres of martial arts, but I like it. I watch you, I'm amazed. I see all the throws and stuff. I'm like, damn, that's pretty good.
Thank you, sir. Well, first and foremost, that means the world to me to hear you say that.
Yeah.
It sparks another question. So we're going to go off script for just a moment because I out a little bit. But you mentioned, you watch and you enjoy the fact that there's all these different divisions now. Is there any maybe one or two moves that you've seen? Like you mentioned, when Casey did the first release, you were like, hey, that's pretty cool, right? Anything you've seen maybe in the past 10, 15 years, maybe one or two moves that stand out to you that you were like, that was cool?
There's so many. Just to go off on a story, when you were talking about memorable tournaments, because I noticed like my students now, my one room has a high ceiling, but that's one of the challenges. You need space because these guys are throwing the bow so high. And that's like, I've watched some people, I'm like, I don't know how it goes up so high, but it recalled when I was competing in Detroit. It was a special tournament they had. There was a lot of prize money back in the day. And they had these low-hanging chandeliers. And it was like no one had room. Like we all kind of complained, and no one was really throwing the bow that much. But literally for a baseball swing, when you came up, the bow would hit. And they were saying, oh, just do whatever. So I went to do my baseball swing, brought the bow up, and it broke. But I'd never stopped because I kind of in my head, like that zone thing, had thought before, well, you know what? I might touch it, but they said, just go with it. So I finished. There was a big meeting, and they decided, because I never stopped, they just judged the form and won. So I was kind of like, and that was just lifting up for a baseball swing. There was no possible way you guys would have, the ability to do that. But it was like that. And the other move that I saw that I really liked wasn't a bow move, and a little off topic, but we had a small ring at the Battle of Atlanta one year for forms, and Philip Wong did wushu. And he was doing his form, and his foot clipped the ropes, and he lost his balance and fell. And right away got up and went into the drunken and just kept the form going. And I was like, damn, that is, innovating like that. He picked it up. I always remember that. That was pretty amazing. I saw Bill Wallace at a demonstration at the U.S. Open, had Billy Blanks up on screen, and Bill had the microphone. He was like talking, and then he does it on purpose. He kind of distracts you, and then did a roundhouse kick and touched, and I was sitting ringside. And it was the fastest kick I've ever seen. Billy's eyes went like this. I was sitting, it was with Chris Casamassa, and I was like, did you see that? Did you see that kick? And I told Bill after when I talked to him, I'm like, that one roundhouse kick just blew me away. Yeah, I said, oh, thanks. But it's funny. It's simple little things like that you see, and you're like, it's crazy. Charlie Lee's sidekick in his form. If you guys haven't seen Charlie Lee, Google him. His sidekick was like a knife going through butter, and it was beautiful. And he actually told me he lowered his kick a bit because John Fournette, another competitor, kicked straight up in the air. Charlie used to kick over his head. So what he do? He couldn't kick straight up, so he lowered it. But he made it so strong and so powerful that it was like apples and oranges. And if you liked the apples, the judges, he won. And yeah, watching him just do a side kick. So sometimes it's just those simple little things that just, blow. And probably the first time I saw guys throw the bow, and I was like, is it ever going to come down? And it comes down. I'm thinking, wow, that's I don't even think I could have tried to do that in my school with the ceilings, but yeah, it's pretty cool. So
awesome.
But
yeah, I mean, that's been a huge part of my game for several years now, is the throw, spin catches. I think there's a fine line. I think sometimes competitors throw it too high and they find themselves like stumbling around for it to come down. I think that you should keep it low enough that you can keep your technique clean going to the catch, then going to the basics.
Yeah.
And speaking of basics, one thing that I just love hearing you talk about there is the appreciation for the little details. The Charlie Lee side kick and the Bill Wallace round kick. I mean, that's, any kids watching this is an all-time great competitor here telling you that one of the most impressive things he ever saw was a quick round kick, right? And so that shows you how important those little details are. Speaking of little details, there's one more innovation of that I want to get to that I think is very subtle. A lot of people may not notice this, but in all the videos I can find of you, you ended your forms this way. On one knee with the strike to the side and then the hand to the knee and then kind of the big hair flipping key out.
Yeah.
Casey ended many of her forms with that pose.
Yeah.
Casey's student Wayne Douglas ended many of his forms. Lauren Carney, same way.
Yeah.
Now every traditional bow form that I can remember, I've ended that ending as kind of a homage to the lineage, right?
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
I can't recall like a specific. It's just, I think I wanted to get down to the knee. I think I remember that. And really, when I was done my form, there wasn't too much left. It was, like a sprint. It was about a minute. And I remember sometimes like, hitting, it was almost, took like a second or two to sort of just get back to, where you're at now. But no real big story. That was just the move. But it worked out pretty good. So I liked it. Give that last thing for the judges to think about before they flip the score.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I love that. And it's just one of those spontaneous things that just happen to stick. You know what I mean? And that's part of what makes it so cool, is that move has now been around for 40 years almost. You know what I mean? It's just so cool. I think that's the coolest thing in the world. But anyway, we've been talking a lot about bow. We do get a lot of viewers on the podcast that are point fighting fans. A lot of the podcasts that are around focus on point fighting. So just briefly, who are some of the toughest fighters you ever had to face? Who was you get punched in the gut? Who punched you in the gut?
There was a lot. Locally, I'll say a name that some people probably haven't heard. His name was Tony Overton, and he was out of Buffalo. And he fought a little bit, bigger national tournament, and he, the punch in the gut, from him a lot of times, And it's funny, we started one of my first tournaments my parents took me to. He was against me because his dad was around this area. Sensei Overton had a big school in Buffalo and stuff, so it was his son. So he got to know my parents. So we kind of grew up, competing, but I always kind of had an edge in forms, and he always sort of had an edge in sparring. So he was really good. And I was lucky just to have some fights. Again, it's kind of like with the bow. I remember the ones I didn't win with Hakeem Alston and some of those challenges. But I always found it fun. And, to me, I was there for the day. You compete first thing in the morning, weapons, then it would be forms, and then you rest, you fight, get something to eat, and you come back for grand. So, it worked out good. I liked it. It was fun. And, especially for the juniors, when you're first coming up, I think it kind of helps your forms. It definitely doesn't hurt, because if you're having a hard time getting to that zone we talked about, some people have to maybe spar, maybe because there's something about that takes a little bit of, pushing yourself, and just trying it might help you, in other areas. So it definitely can hurt. So.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a great take that participating in both, whether you're fighting, helping your forms, or your forms helping fighting. I do think that's important, especially for the kids that are first getting into it. And you said earlier, you don't know what you're going to wind up being really good at, right? And so kind of giving everybody an opportunity to figure that out. Moving away from competition for a moment, because we also get a lot of our viewers, especially from the black belt audience, that were big WMAC Masters fans. So talk a little bit, maybe a story or two that you want to share about playing.
WMAC Masters was awesome. I had done a little bit of film work before that, but it was with actors and film people. But WMAC Masters, even though I didn't know everyone going in, they were all martial artists. And so you just had that common bond. So I had never met Herb Perez, Olympic Taekwondo. I got to meet him and hang out. And a lot of the guys I knew going in, like Chris Casamassa, Larry Lamb, Hakeem Alston, they're all, I mean, I lived with Chris in California for, a year. So we're all really good friends. And it was the most fun. So you would have every show, you'd have a couple characters have a main fight, but then they'd have to fight the ninjas, which was us, except for Hakeem. He was too tall. He got out of that, but it was us in the ninja with the mask on. So you're working all the time, helping everyone out, making them look good, being the fall guy or doing stuff. So it was a great time. Like that was the other movie things were okay. But it's just a different breed, like the movies and stuff like that. But the WMAC was like us hanging out at a tournament. And it was quite a bit of fun. And Pat Johnson, who actually, I guess you would say, discovered me at the Battle of Atlanta and brought me in to do the Shoot Fighter movies. He was involved with WMAC. So he kind of chose most of the casting. So I got to work with him, and that was fun too. He, it was great. Pat had this little exercise equipment. It was called a grab bar, which was basically just a little stand with handles, and you could do dips and pull-ups off it. And he would school us on those exercises. We'd sit and train. If we weren't filming, we'd be training. So it was it was a lot of fun, WMAC. So
I mean, I can only imagine how much fun that would be to be on set with not only sport karate world champions, but from other disciplines as well. Now, just kind of a free-for-all here. Is there like a scene, like a particular big fight that you had on WMAC Masters that you remember just loving filming, or maybe something from the Street Fighter movies or other projects that you're this was? Well,
there was a scene in there was an episode where me and Ho Young Pak were having a competition. It was who could hang upside down at one point. But what it was there was like dialogue scenes going on, and then in the background you would see me hanging upside down, like on a chin-up bar. Well, if you hang upside down long enough, blood rushes to your head. It's not comfortable. So the funny thing was, the guys, and I didn't learn they were intentionally like messing up their lines, keeping me because upside down. I'm like, because then they go, cut, let's do it again. You're okay back there, Mike? I'm like, upside down, yeah. And then finally, I'm like, I was so mad. I was like, guys, get it right. I can't stay upside down any longer. But that was a rough one. Kind of the funny part too is every once in a while you'd miss and you'd hit each other. I mean, and it was just the expression, because you have to keep going, and it wasn't so much you were worried that you hit them. It was when they said cut, because then you knew you were just going to get a hard time about, what just happened and stuff. So there's a few of those scenes. And probably my other funniest I guess, klutziest scene. We had in Batman and Robin, they brought me in to be one of the ice thugs. And because they thought it was going to be on ice, they weren't sure. Pat Johnson he said, "You can skate, right, Mike?" I go, "Yeah, I'm a Canadian. We all skate, you know, it's okay." So it turns out it's rollerblades, which I hadn't really used. So I buy these rollerblades like a week before I go down, and it's pretty much the same. But in hockey, you turn your skates like this. But in roller, you have to sort of, I never got onto it. So the first scene, we walk it out, George Clooney's Batman, and I have to come in with my, like a stick at George Clooney's head. And and then he's going to like do a block. And then he leaves and the stunt guy comes in. Well, I come in fast like this, go to take this. I can't stop. So I go right by him and he has to get out of the way. Well, on these sets, it's such a huge budget and you can't hurt the star. It's like, obviously, I don't want to hurt anybody, but you can't knock out. He says something to an AD, someone goes, and it just goes around the whole set. And then finally, Pat comes out, he says, "Mike, you can't do that." Like, I was in the doghouse so bad. Luckily, I still have my mask on. I wasn't taking that thing off until I left the set. But yeah, that was my brush with George Clooney. So,
So you just about tackled George Clooney.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, it was fun. You know, the WMAC was better just with the people you were working with. And but it's good. Like Larry Lamb's gone on. He's one of the top stunt coordinators now in Hollywood. And, you know, so it really launched some careers in that field as well, which is cool. Absolutely. That's one of the great things about karate is the ability to get into fields like that. And now as we approach the end of the show here, I want to get to some of the work that you're doing right now as president of the World Karate Commission in Canada. We've had Richard Bowden on the show before, president of the U.S. So first, just talk a little bit about your role and what you enjoy most about it. Well, when I stopped competing and, you know, running the schools, I got involved with some organizations that were sending teams to Europe. And it was like WACO, WK, and we started WKC, World Karate Commission, based on that the world's getting so much smaller now. I mean, even at, you know, American tournaments, you have Europeans coming over. And we recognize in Europe, you have some awesome fighters, you know, their forms, weapons are getting strong. And we basically wanted a system. And I mean, I love NASCA. It worked good for me. I was able to do 8-9 trips a year. But we just found how it's set up. Like here in Canada, people do a regional competition. And if they qualify at that, they do a national one to make the Canadian team. And then they go to the Worlds. So I actually have competitors that really just gear up for 3 events: the regionals, the nationals, and the Worlds. They'll do some other ones, but that's it. And then they would go over to Europe. If it's in Ireland, it's a week. But time-wise and expense-wise, it actually works out better than, maybe doing 8 or 9 events like that. So it became very accessible. And for competitors, it just sort of made sense. You do regional, do national, do world, bang, 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 3. And just kind of like, I've got students now, and it's the same, with NASCA, but I have students that, are texting and emailing their friends in Ireland and Germany and, Guatemala. Like, the world's so much, smaller that way. And the tournaments themselves, I just really I can't describe the intensity of when you have an Irish fighter, a Canadian fighter, and the crowd, because you're walking by, and even if you don't know who the Canadian is, you just start cheering Canada, Canada. So almost every match in every division is like something on stage and at like a night show. So it's the intensity and the experience is second to none. You can see some of the the videos and stuff, and like it's loud, like those events, and it's really addictive. Once you get there and you see it, you kind of just want to be a part of it. And yeah, we like it. So that's been my focus, competing wise, is doing that. And it's also allowed me to, work the rules. Like we actually have traditional bow where you have to have two hands on. So you can't do the one hand, it spins two. Then we have creative bow, which is basically what I used to do. You have to always have one hand on the bow. You can still pass it, but one. And then we have extreme where you can do the throws. So it allowed me to sort of also tailor the rules to what I like to see, weapons wise. And yeah, it's really growing, and we're happy with it. And we're really partnered with like Richard here. We have Joe Turney in England, Mick Dunleavy in Ireland, just top guys, quality individuals who just bring good teams. And it's lots of fun. And John Duvras is my partner, and working with him, we've worked together over 20 years now. So it's lots of fun.
That is awesome. And I can attest to any kids watching this or parents that are considering getting their kids in WKC. What Xian Bernardo is talking about here with that international feel and almost like a Grand's atmosphere every division. I did back 2008, 2009. I did WK, I think, when you were still involved with it. And, same type of feel. I remember the first time I did it was in Orlando, the quick story. And I was kind of this up-and-coming bow guy, never really won anything major. And I wound up being kind of like the fourth place. I stumbled in the qualifier or whatever, and I was like the fourth place right into the finals. And then I went to the finals, and it was me and 3 Canadians, right? And I remember in large part, that bow pedigree because of yourself, right? And I remember, because I was already training with Lauren at the time, who had taught me about you and the lineage and everything. And somebody was telling me about, like, hey, these are Bernardo's bow guys that you're in the finals with. I'm like, what? Like, no, and I wound up getting into a tiebreaker. It was the Canadians were 2 bow guys and a sword guy. Me and the other 2 bow guys all tied for the gold and had to run our forms back again. I was fortunate, wound up winning. But where the international flair comes into play, I went to Spain the next year, won the last division again, and then I got booed on the medal stand in Spain by the Canadian team.
Oh.
Wanted the Canadians to win so bad, you know what I mean? To me, I love that. I love that motivation and that little rivalry there. But that's what you get today in the WKC. You get cross-country rivalry, especially in the weapons divisions, I feel like, between the U.S. and Canada. So I highly recommend it for that reason. Last little thing before we get to wrap up here. You mentioned the rules that you were able to have a hand in with the weapons. This surprises a lot of people because everybody sees me in videos throwing my bow all the time. I love the creative weapons rule. I love the have one hand on the bow at all times, which forces a competitor to truly be creative. Don't just throw the bow a different way like everybody does. Find a way to use your bow manipulation and be creative. Just speak a little bit to that, because I endorse that rule through and through.
I love it. I mean, it's just because there is so much that you can still do, and you can put together sequences. And I mean, it's kind of kept me somewhat current because I have so many, competitors that compete, and, I'm always, trying to develop their forms, try to do new. And you probably find the same thing. If you have, 4 or 5 students, you want to make them all a little different. I mean, there's going to be underlining basic things, but so it keeps you thinking. And it's funny, just in this lockdown, I was telling my wife, because we're locked down again here in Canada, I had to go in and help. She was doing a private, but I had the person bring their bow, because I'm like, I haven't done anything creative in, in months. I got to, try to think of some things, and, it sort of keeps you going. I love that part of it, trying to develop moves. And, sometimes it doesn't work. My students know the process. Like, I start doing something, they kind of follow, but they know where we start isn't where we're going to finish. It's going to be different, but, we work at it, and then everyone's a little different. And I find sometimes, they'll do something by accident. I'm like, well, that worked. I like that way, and we go there. So I really like that process. And, but yeah, you keep the hand on, it keeps it, somewhat is that nice blend between the completely open and the traditional. And you need speed. You need a lot of things that you need in the open, but you need to be solid with your technique. Absolutely. And yeah. And then if you have it all, then, right, you're going to be like yourself. You have a ton of success. So that's how it works.
Thank you. And again, your kind words mean the world to me. But for all the kids watching and listening to this, that's the biggest takeaway from this podcast is the importance of the creativity balance with the basics and being able to master the performance and execution of those basics. And that's when the creativity really starts to matter. You kind of need one before the other the judges even care about, right? And so we talk about take-home messages. Last thing, I promise. What would be for those kids watching that are going to be going to the Battle of Atlanta or the U.S. Open soon or any of these upcoming events or WKC Worlds when they come back around, what is your best advice to the young competitors who one day want to be the best in the world?
Okay, so, it's kind of simple. If you win or lose, all that is determined in training. You can't live and die off of, I won first, I won second, especially if you're competing every couple of weeks, because your form, maybe the other three guys dropped their bow and you hung on to it. It wasn't great, but you win. So it's not, about how you place. What you have to do is you do your form. Soon as you're done, you have to get in your head. You have to figure out what part of that form you didn't like, what part of that form didn't work the way it should have. And that's your focus when you get back training. And you figure out your own system. Do you do that sequence for a half hour or do you do it 30 times a day? Like, is it numbers? Is it time? You figure out what you're going to do and you just keep working that part of your form. And then you get to the next tournament and your goal is just to keep getting stronger and stronger. And then the winning will take care of itself. But if you just go off, I won first, maybe I can take it easy now to the next tournament. Because, like you win, there's a lot of hungry guys that just want to beat you. And, I was like that when I first started, and I recognized that, everyone else behind me wants what I got and you don't want to give it up. So you have to just train, and you've got to, like I believe in cross training. I've told people who have come to me for lessons, I've looked at them like, I don't think you could do 15 push-ups. Like, how am I going to teach you? You can't fake being strong. You got to be strong. I've told people, I said, do 100 push-ups a day. That'll help your form. And they look at me like, how's that going to help my form? Well, it's, you're going to be stronger, but you're going to be focused. And, working out is, people go to the gym 3 times a week. Training is 24/7. That means I do my homework at noon because I know when school's done, I want to go to class. I don't stay out late so 24 hours a day, I'm thinking about how my life's going to revolve around training as opposed to working out. And, some people say, weekend warriors. That's great if that's what you want. But if you want to be more, then you have to train like that. And if we want to be, as our sport grows, we need people who train like athletes and not, expecting results with half-hearted efforts, So, and everyone can do it. It's just a matter of putting in the time, working hard, seeking out knowledge. And then when you get that knowledge, take that one thing and just keep working it. And, that's my advice. So get out there, have fun. Tournaments should be fun. I had a great time, and it's all about self-improvement and getting better each time. And you'll end up on the podium.
That is awesome. Yeah. I could not have asked for a better closing monologue. If anybody's tuning in at the end of this show, I know I say this every week, but I'm going to say it again. If anybody's tuning in at the end, make sure you rewind this broadcast and go back and watch the whole episode. all types of great stories, great tips, advice, information, perspectives that have never been heard before. Shion Bernardo, I cannot thank you enough. This has been absolutely incredible. To our viewers, thank you as well for tuning in. We couldn't do this without you. If you enjoyed this, make sure you hit that share button so that all your friends and family can see it too, because so much inspiration all throughout. And then lastly, a big thank you to the one and only Black Belt Magazine for hosting the podcast. This has been episode 70. Master Bernardo, any final thoughts or comments before we head out of here?
No, I just thank you for having me on. I appreciate that people still remember, and I watch you. I'm really proud that you're keeping it alive, and just keep working hard. And the Black Belt Magazine, it's the Bible of the martial arts. So there you go. It's been popular when I was competing, and it still is. So that's awesome.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you once again so much. Thank you to everybody tuning in once again. This has been episode 70 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, and I'll see you next time.